Before we begin this amazing story, we would love for you to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to get notified when we drop new stories. Now enjoy. The morning after the attack on the compound, Kyoma didn't sleep. She lay awake on the mat, her eyes tracing the ceiling, her body still aching from the chaos of the night before. But her mind wasn't on the pain. It was on something else entirely. Something clearer than she'd felt in a long time. Purpose. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. It had become something sharper. A tool. A blade she could wield instead of a chain around her ankle. Nonso had called a meeting at first light. The air was still cool, and the sky wore the colors of early dawn. The women gathered under the mango tree at the center of the compound, wrapped in shawls, their eyes heavy but alert. Everyone knew the attack wouldn't be the last. But something had shifted. Kyoma saw it in their faces. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were ready to fight back. Kelechi stood next to Nonso with a file of papers clutched in her arms. She handed Kyoma a thick document. "This is your story," she said, "and it's going to be published today. Word for word, just as you told it." Kyoma looked down at the cover page. Her name was right there. Not hidden, not blurred. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice steady. Kelechi didn't hesitate. "You've already risked your life by speaking. Now, we make sure the world listens." Kyoma nodded. Her fingers curled tighter around the paper. She was done hiding. If her aunt wanted to chase her, she would no longer be running. She would be standing exactly where the truth could protect her. That afternoon, the article went live. It spread like fire. First, local blogs. Then radio stations. Then television segments. They all picked it up. Her face was blurred in some reports, but her words weren't. Her description of the doghouse. The names of the girls who never came back. The things Auntie Nkairu said in the dark. The silence that smothered everything in that house. By evening, Kyoma's name was trending on social media. And for the first time, it wasn't just strangers reacting, it was people from her old neighborhood. Her former classmates. Women who had been quiet for too long. A hashtag appeared on its own. #JusticeForKyoma. Then another. #WhereIsObinna. And it didn't stop. By nightfall, something else happened. A woman named Ifunanya, in her early 30s, showed up at the compound. She carried a duffel bag and eyes that had seen war. "I saw your face," she told Kyoma. "I saw your name. I knew I had to come." At first, Kyoma wasn't sure who she was. But the moment Ifunanya mentioned the metal gate and the smell of that back room, Kyoma's eyes filled with tears. They weren't strangers. They had lived the same nightmare, only in different years. "She made me work as a maid when I was 13, Ifunanya whispered. "She beat me until my back peeled. She told me no one would care if I died." Now, Kyoma wasn't just fighting for herself and Obinna. She was fighting for all of them. Word reached Nonso by the next morning. Auntie Nkairu had gone silent. Her phone switched off. Her house locked. But they also heard something else. She wasn't alone. "She's trying to run," Nonso said, pacing the courtyard. "She's smart. She'll find a way to disappear unless we stop her now." Kyoma stood beside him, not blinking. "Then we find her first." They contacted a lawyer named Mrs. Agbani, known for handling dangerous human trafficking cases. She agreed to help, pro bono. The woman didn't flinch when she heard the details. Instead, she nodded and said, "We'll smoke her out. Just give me the matchstick." Meanwhile, Nonso, Kelechi, and Adaku began compiling everything: testimonies, photos, audio recordings Kyoma had taken on her phone when she was still in that house. Even the torn school uniform she had hidden in her bag when she escaped. Every piece of it mattered now. But the real turning point came 3 days later. It was late in the evening. The compound was quiet. Kyoma was helping Ifunanya sweep the hallway when someone banged on the gate. Hard. 3 times. Everyone froze. Nonso ran to the door, armed. When he opened it, there stood a boy no older than 14. Skinny. Dust-covered. His face was sunken, but his eyes held something Kyoma hadn't seen in a while. Hope. I'm looking for Kyoma, he said, panting. She's the one in the story, right? Kyoma stepped forward, heart racing. The boy swallowed hard. My sister, she's still in that house. She's 12. Her name is Ada Aura. She's been locked in the same doghouse. Every sound in the compound stopped. The air itself seemed to tighten. Kyoma took a slow step toward the boy. When did you see her last? 2 nights ago. She said they were moving her somewhere. A big man came in a black car. I ran before they saw me. Kelechi was already scribbling notes. Adaku held the boy gently and led him to sit down. Kyoma stood in the middle of the courtyard, the sky overhead dark and heavy with clouds. Her chest burned. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about rescue, retribution, and ending the cycle once and for all. The storm was coming. And this time, Kyoma would be the one to strike first. The compound didn't sleep that night. Kyoma sat with the boy, Chisholm, in a quiet corner, listening as he tried to remember everything. His voice shook as he spoke, but he didn't stop, not even when his hands started trembling or when the memories brought tears to his eyes. He had waited too long for someone to believe him, and now that someone had finally listened, he poured it all out like water bursting through a cracked dam. My sister Ada Aura, she's small for her age. She never talks too much. Always scared. They made her clean the toilets. If she missed one spot, they wouldn't let her eat. His lips quivered. There was one night I heard her crying, and she begged me to help her. Kyoma's heart twisted so hard she had to grip the edge of the bench to stay grounded. Chisholm had run away the same night, sneaking out through the hole in the back fence of the compound. 4 days, he'd slept in unfinished buildings, begging for food, listening to conversations at kiosks, waiting for anything that would tell him what to do. Then he heard a radio in a roadside canteen. A woman was talking about a girl named Kyoma. Something in the voice, the strength beneath the pain, made him listen harder. Then they said her full name. He recognized it instantly. I knew if anyone could help my sister, he whispered, it would be you. The fire in Kyoma's chest turned into something fierce, almost painful. We'll get her out. I promise. By morning, plans were already forming. Nonso made phone calls, sending out messages to trusted contacts. Kelechi started gathering information, address records, car plate numbers, police reports that were never followed up on. Mrs. Agbani was already on her way with 2 investigators. They weren't relying on faith anymore. They were going in prepared. Kyoma could barely eat, barely breathe. Her thoughts stayed with Ada Aura, imagining her locked in the same kennel she once slept in. Was she cold? Hungry? Was she counting the days? Or had she already stopped hoping? Late that afternoon, a scout returned from the outskirts of Udi town with new information. A black SUV had been spotted at an abandoned property outside the village. A house with rusted gates, broken windows, and no neighbors. No noise. Just silence. She's moving the girls again, Nonso said as they gathered in the compound's main room. If we wait even one more day, they'll be gone. Kyoma's voice didn't shake when she spoke. Then we go tonight. Everyone looked at her. Kyoma, Adaku said gently, you don't have to be there. You've done enough. No, she said firmly. She locked me in that doghouse. She tried to bury me. I'm not letting another girl stay trapped while I hide behind walls. Adaku didn't argue. None of them did. That night, they left in 3 cars, silent, steady, headlights dimmed as they moved through back roads and dusty paths. Mrs. Agbani sat in the front seat, flipping through a file of legal documents with the calm of someone who had walked into darkness before and refused to blink. Kyoma sat in the back seat beside Nonso, hands clenched on her lap. The road seemed endless, stretching between shadows and the occasional flicker of a faraway lantern. Then, finally, they saw it. A house that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Cracked walls. Iron gate slightly ajar. No lights. No sound. But something told Kyoma Ada Aura was in there. The plan was simple. Go in quiet, go in fast. Mrs. Agbani had brought 2 officers, ones she trusted completely. No sirens, no noise. If they were lucky, they'd get the girls out before Nkairu even realized they were there. As they moved toward the house, every sound was louder. The crunch of gravel under their feet. The soft whisper of clothes brushing skin. Kyoma's breath came in short bursts. Her heart raced. But her steps didn't stop. Nonso opened the gate. They slipped inside. The first room was empty, dust and broken furniture. The smell of urine and sweat lingered in the air like something trapped. Then they heard it, a muffled cry. Kyoma froze. It came from the backyard. They all ran. Behind the house was a small shed. Locked from the outside. Just like the doghouse. Nonso didn't hesitate. He kicked the door once, twice. On the third blow, it gave way. And there, huddled on the floor, arms wrapped tightly around her knees, was Ada Aura. Kyoma dropped to her knees beside her. Ada Aura, she whispered, it's okay. You're safe now. The girl didn't speak. She just stared, wide-eyed and shaking. Chisholm pushed through the group, kneeling beside them. It's me, Ada. It's me. Her eyes finally moved. Recognition bloomed, and with it came tears, rivers of them. She launched herself into her brother's arms, and for the first time since she had arrived, she spoke. One word. Kyoma. The house wasn't empty. There were 3 other girls, frightened, silent, but alive. The officers moved quickly, guiding them out. Mrs. Agbani handed Kyoma a clean blanket from the car. She wrapped it around Ada Aura gently, just as Adaku had once wrapped her in a shawl after her escape. By dawn, they were gone from that cursed place. Back at the compound, Ada Aura slept beside her brother in a warm bed, her breathing finally even. The other girls were given fresh clothes, warm food, and the one thing they had long been denied, safety. And Kyoma? She stood by the compound gate, looking out into the early morning sky, hands tucked into her sweater. She was different now. Not just a survivor. Not just a voice. She was becoming a force. One the world couldn't ignore. One Auntie Nkairu would never silence again. The days after the rescue were a strange blend of quiet and intensity. The compound became a halfway home for more than just Kyoma now. It was filled with hushed voices, restless footsteps, and eyes that had seen far too much. But underneath the silence, something was growing, something strong. A current of defiance. A refusal to go back to the way things were. Ada Aura barely spoke at first. She clung to Chisholm, always 2 steps behind him, her small fingers constantly curled around the hem of his shirt like a safety rope. When Kyoma sat near her, she would flinch at sudden movements. Loud noises made her jump. But she didn't cry much. She just stared. Deep, deep stares, as if watching everything from a far place in her mind. Kyoma knew that stare. She had worn it. And she knew healing didn't come in a single moment. It came in waves, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Sometimes not at all. But it helped to have someone who understood. So, Kyoma didn't push. She just sat close enough to be near, far enough not to crowd. She started folding paper birds out of old newspapers. She didn't say a word. Just folded, creased, and placed them near Ada Aura's mat. On the 4th day, Ada Aura picked one up and whispered, "Is it flying?" Kyoma looked at her, heart squeezing gently. "Not yet. But it will." By the end of that week, the compound had received 5 more girls. All from different villages. Some brought in by neighbors, others by relatives who had kept quiet for years but now found courage through Kyoma's story. The rooms filled with whispered names and questions no child should have to ask. Will they come for me? What happens if they find me here? Why didn't anyone stop them before? One evening, as the sky faded behind a line of quiet trees, Kelechi brought Kyoma into the office and slid a newspaper across the desk. Kyoma stared at the front page. There she was. Unblurred. Name in full. Face in full. The headline read, "From the doghouse to defiance, the girl who shook the system." It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a fire. And Kyoma had lit it. "You need to read this part," Kelechi said, tapping the second column. The government was calling for an emergency review of child protection laws. A task force was being formed. Names were being submitted. And one of the names that had surfaced through a brave anonymous tip was Nkairu's. Not just as an abuser, but as a recruiter. "She's part of a ring," Kelechi said, her voice low. "She doesn't just abuse them. She hands them off." Kyoma's skin went cold. Her breath caught in her chest. "How many?" "We don't know yet. Could be dozens. Could be more." Kyoma's hands curled slowly on the edge of the paper. "Then I'm not done." The next day, she sat before a panel of 3 human rights investigators. Cameras were turned off. Recorders were placed gently on the table. Kyoma, for the first time, told her story from beginning to end without flinching. She told them about the kennel, the chains, the smell of blood. About the way Nkairu whispered to girls at night. About Obinna's sudden disappearance. She described the scars, ones on her back, her arms, but mostly the invisible ones no one could see. She didn't cry. Not once. When she finished, one of the investigators, an older woman with a quiet voice, leaned forward and said, "This testimony will change things, Kyoma." Kyoma met her eyes without blinking. "Then don't waste it." Later that week, while helping Kelechi sort donations in the compound storeroom, Kyoma overheard Nonso's phone ring. His voice on the call changed. Grew serious. He ended the call quickly and walked straight to her. "They've found something," he said. "A house. It's in Enugu. Abandoned but guarded. Quiet. But people say girls go in and don't come out." Kyoma didn't even ask for permission. "I'm going." "No," Nonso said quickly. "You're not trained. It's too dangerous." Kyoma stood up slowly. "I don't need training to know what a prison looks like. I lived in one." The conversation ended right there. Nonso didn't argue again. They planned the next raid in secret. Mrs. Agbani pulled strings with the right officials. Kelechi mapped escape routes. Adaku trained the older girls in basic first aid. Kyoma prepared herself mentally, letting her fear live beside her strength instead of chasing it away. The night before the raid, she sat outside with Ada Aura. A full moon lit up the sky, and the quiet between them was calm, not tense. Ada Aura placed a small paper bird in Kyoma's palm. "This one is flying now," she said. Kyoma smiled. "So are you." The next day, they moved. Enugu was loud, crowded, nothing like the quiet compound. But Kyoma didn't focus on the noise. She focused on the gate. The walls. The feeling in her stomach that hadn't gone away. When they breached the house, everything happened fast: yells, footsteps, voices calling for help. There were chains. There were names written on dirty walls. But most importantly, there were girls. 9 of them. One barely 6. Kyoma helped untie the last girl herself. Her hands moved quickly, her heart pounding. But as she pulled the cloth from the girl's mouth, something in the girl's eyes made her freeze. Recognition. Not fear. The girl stared at her, then whispered hoarsely, "You're Kyoma." Kyoma's chest tightened. "Yes," she whispered. "I am." The girl smiled weakly, and for a moment, Kyoma saw it. The shift. The hope. That night, back at the compound, the 9 girls were given food, warmth, and the softest beds available. Kyoma stood by the gate again, watching the sky. The same stars. The same wind. But she wasn't the same girl anymore. And neither were they. Each one saved was a piece of her own healing. But she knew, deep in her gut, the real confrontation hadn't happened yet. Auntie Nkayaru was still out there. And Kyoma was ready. A week passed, but Kyoma's mind never left Enugu. The rescued girls were recovering slowly. Ada Aura had begun to eat full meals again and no longer slept with the light on. Even the compound felt different now, like it had taken a deep breath after months of holding it in. There were whispers of change everywhere. A new wing was being built to shelter more survivors. A journalist had offered to document each girl's story anonymously. Politicians were suddenly interested in visiting. But beneath the smiles, Kyoma knew the real war hadn't started. Nkayaru was still out there. The woman who'd locked her in a kennel. The woman who trafficked children. The woman who laughed while girls cried for their mothers. One night, Kyoma woke from a dream, sweat on her forehead, heart thudding in her chest. She had seen the doghouse again. But this time, it wasn't her in it. It was Ada Aura. Kyoma couldn't sleep after that. She paced the compound's corridor until the first signs of daylight began to pull shadows off the walls. That morning, she walked straight to Nonso and said, "We're not waiting anymore." Nonso didn't need her to explain. He nodded. They had tried to play by the book. Reporting. Waiting. Hoping someone with a badge and a title would do something. But they were moving too slow. And girls were still vanishing. So, they created their own plan. Not reckless. But bold. They started with what they knew. Nkayaru was smart, but not invisible. She still had property, still paid bribes, still moved money around to hide her trail. But she had become careful. She didn't use the same drivers twice. She avoided speaking directly on phones. Everything was done through someone else. Everything except one thing, her visits to the orphanage on the outskirts of Ogyug. It was the same pattern. She would arrive in an unmarked car, dressed like a volunteer. She'd stay an hour. Sometimes two. And by the next week, one child would be relocated. No trace. No follow-up. Kyoma watched it happen with her own eyes through binoculars. It made her stomach twist. "She's hunting," Kelechi said bitterly. They came up with a plan. The next time Nkayaru came, they would follow. Quietly. No police. No calls. Just evidence. They'd collect proof so solid no court, no commissioner, no chief could ignore it. They would catch her in the act. For 5 days, Kyoma and Nonso camped in a rented flat down the street from the orphanage. They took turns watching. 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 On the 6th day, Nkayaru arrived. Same grey car. Same fake smile. Same routine. But this time, they followed. She didn't take the highway. She snaked through muddy backroads, trying to lose anyone trailing her. But Nonso was patient. He kept distance, never rushing, never getting too close. They ended up in a quiet compound deep in the forest edges of Enkapolagu. Tall fences. Armed men. A single warehouse in the back. Kyoma's skin went cold. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a hub. They watched through a crack in the trees. Children were being loaded into trucks. Quietly. Quickly. Some were crying. Most looked numb. There were no hugs. No explanations. Just vanishing. Kyoma took out her small camcorder and recorded everything. Faces. License plates. Boxes labeled with fake charity names. It felt like the air was thick with poison. Then they heard her voice. Nkayaru. She was laughing on the phone. Walking slowly past the truck, waving at the driver. Dressed like someone who ran a church, with a scarf and a gold pin shaped like a dove. Kyoma's hands tightened on the camera. She wanted to scream. To run out and grab the woman by the throat. But she held it in. Proof first. Justice later. As Nkayaru entered the warehouse, Nonso whispered, "Let's go. We've seen enough." Kyoma didn't move. She looked one last time at the gate, the guards, the truck now starting its engine, and whispered, "We'll come back for them." That night, they returned to the compound with footage that would burn through the media like fire through dry grass. The moment Mrs. Agbani saw it, her face turned pale. "This changes everything," she said. "She's not just one person in a network. She is the network." The next morning, Kyoma stood in front of a room filled with reporters. She didn't read from a paper. She didn't clear her throat or fidget. She told the truth. She showed the video. And when the final image froze on Kairu's face, smiling, waving, Kyoma looked straight into the camera lens and said, "This is who you ignored. This is who we were handed over to. You said it was our fault. That we were stubborn. That we were liars. Well, here's your liar." The video was everywhere by sunset. Social media exploded. Hashtags were created. Phone lines jammed. Parents who had lost children years ago began calling the hotline. Some recognized faces. Others recognized buildings. A few whispered the word justice like it was a prayer they'd given up on. By the third day, a warrant was issued. Nkairu was wanted for trafficking, abuse, child endangerment, fraud, and obstruction of justice. But she was gone. Vanished. Her house was empty. Her accounts wiped. Her phone disconnected. Kyoma felt the rage like a blade in her chest. But she didn't panic. She knew someone like Nkairu wouldn't run forever. She wasn't a coward. She was a predator. And predators always circle back. So, Kyoma waited. Prepared. Watched. Because now, this wasn't just survival. It was war. And she wasn't fighting alone anymore. The air in the compound had shifted. It wasn't fear anymore, it was readiness. The girls, the staff, the volunteers, even the ones who used to whisper in the corners, they were no longer just recovering. They were preparing. Everyone knew it was only a matter of time before Nkairu reappeared. Someone that cruel, that controlling, didn't just disappear into the wind. She had too much pride, too much hunger for power. She would resurface. The question was when and how. Kyoma didn't sleep much anymore. She didn't want to. Every time she closed her eyes, she dreamed of the gate in Enkapoligou. Of the children being loaded like stolen goods. She saw Adeora's eyes in every child's face. So, she spent her nights reading old case files. Newspaper archives. Whispers from old volunteers. There were patterns. Nkairu liked to work through women. Always women. She used them to gain trust in communities, pass herself off as a helper, a savior, a midwife. Then she'd vanish with the most vulnerable, always the quietest children, the ones with no family left, no one asking questions. Then, 2 weeks later, it happened. Kyoma was walking back from the clinic block when she saw the envelope. It was unmarked, left on the front gate. She opened it without thinking. Inside, there was only one thing. A photograph. Kyoma's younger self, maybe 6, maybe 7, curled up behind the doghouse bars. Dirty knees. Tears streaking her cheeks. And behind her, in the shadows, stood Nkairu. Not holding her. Not comforting her. Just watching. There was no note. No signature. Just that image. Nonso took it from her gently when he saw her hands shaking. "She's sending a message," he said. Kyoma nodded slowly, her throat tight. "She's not done." Kelechi stormed out of the main hall when she heard. "She wants to scare you," she snapped. "She wants you to back off." But Kyoma wasn't going anywhere. She called a meeting that night. Not just staff, but every girl who was old enough to understand. The common hall was silent as she stood in front of them. "She's watching," Kyoma said. "And she wants us to feel small. She wants us to remember when we were locked away and too scared to speak." Adeora shifted in her chair, eyes fixed on Kyoma like they were glued there. "But that's not who we are anymore," Kyoma continued. "She doesn't own our fear. Not anymore." Silence stretched long and thick. Then, one of the older girls, Yuzo Amaka, stood. She was barely 15, her arms still healing from burns and Kaoru had left. "What do we do?" she asked. "We wait for her." Kayoma shook her head. "No. We smoke her out." They began tracking all Kaoru's old properties. Every orphanage she ever donated to. Every abandoned building she had once purchased through proxies. Kelechi and Nonso pulled old records, contacted former drivers, bribed landlords. They narrowed it down to one place. An estate on the outskirts of Nsukka. No one had seen activity there in years. But something was off. The land was still being taxed. No rentals, no tenants, yet the water bills were paid monthly. It was a shell. Kayoma knew what a shell felt like. They didn't go in through the front gate this time. They waited until night. Then slipped in through the back, through a broken fence that led into a small, weeded garden. The silence was deep. Too deep. Like something was holding its breath. Inside, it looked abandoned at first. Dusty chairs. Shattered tiles. Paint peeling off in flakes. Then they found the stairwell leading underground. Kayoma led the way. Her hands shook, but her steps were steady. The air grew colder with every step. Damp. Heavy. Like the air under a well. Then the door appeared. Steel. Padlocked. Nonso pulled a small crowbar from his bag. Broke the lock in 2 tries. They entered a hallway lit by dim, red emergency lights. Kayoma saw the cages first. They weren't big. Just enough space for a child to sit up. No beds. No food. A bucket in the corner of each. Then the whispers. Voices. Kayoma turned fast. Behind one barred window, 2 girls sat huddled. One couldn't be more than 5. They were silent when they saw Kayoma, unsure whether to trust her. She crouched quickly and whispered, "My name is Kayoma. I came for you." Their silence broke into tears. There were 12 of them in total. Some spoke. Some didn't. All of them looked like they hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. Nonso radioed for the emergency team. Kelechi was already calling the authorities. But Kayoma wasn't satisfied. Kaoru wasn't there. Until the very last room. They heard a creak. Turned slowly. She was standing there. In the doorway. Hands raised. Face calm. Wearing the same scarf from the video. No panic. Just cold, twisted calm. "Well," Kaoru said, her voice smooth like oil, "I knew you'd come. You always were too stubborn for your own good." Kayoma didn't move. Didn't flinch. She stared at her. "You don't scare me." Kaoru smiled. "No. But you're still mine. All of this, what do you think changes with one video? One rescue? Do you know how deep I run?" Kayoma stepped forward, slow, steady. "Then keep running. But know this, you're not a shadow anymore. We've dragged you into the light." Sirens began wailing in the distance. Kaoru's eyes shifted, just slightly. A twitch of something breaking through her mask. Then she lunged. But Kayoma was ready. She ducked, dodged, grabbed the woman's wrist and slammed her against the doorframe. "You don't get to touch another girl again," she hissed. By the time the officers stormed in, Kaoru was on the floor, wrists tied with Nonso's belt. When they dragged her out, Kayoma stood over her. No tears. No screaming. Just breath. Freedom. Behind her, the 12 rescued girls watched. One of them stepped forward, tiny, barefoot, her voice barely a whisper. "Is she gone now?" Kayoma turned. Knelt. "She will be. And if she ever comes back, we'll be ready." The compound became a different place after that. No longer just safe. It became a fortress. Kayoma's name traveled further than ever. People came from across the country just to see the girl who once lived in a doghouse and now built a haven. But Kayoma didn't care about the fame. She cared about every girl who still waited. And she would keep waiting too until every last one was home. The day after Kaoru was arrested, The sun rose like it had something to prove. There was no celebration. No balloons. No marching bands. Just quiet relief, like the air had lost some of its weight. The compound buzzed gently, not in noise, but in movement. Girls who once refused to come out of their rooms now sat in corners sketching flowers. Some braided each other's hair under the mango tree. Others stood by the fence, watching the road without fear. But for Kyoma, the quiet felt louder than anything. She sat on the floor of her small room, surrounded by files, photocopies, statements, timelines, old photographs. She kept tracing the same line in her notebook, "This is bigger than her." Over and over, like the words were trying to become something else. Because she knew the truth. Nkairu had been arrested, but Nkairu was only one piece. Just a head on a larger beast. One woman couldn't have moved all those children. One woman couldn't have bribed so many officers, silenced that many voices, erased that many records. No. It was a system. And systems don't die with one arrest. So, Kyoma stood. She walked to the mirror. Stared at herself. She was thinner than before. Her eyes had lost that softness they once carried. But there was something stronger behind them now. Something sharper. She looked like a girl who had been forged in fire. She picked up the envelope that had once held her doghouse photo and slipped it into her coat pocket. There was one more place she needed to go. Asterisk asterisk. The courtroom was full. Not with strangers. With faces. Real ones. Parents who had once been gaslit. Girls who had once been returned and ignored. Volunteers who had tried to speak up and were punished for it. They filled every row, shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the dock. Kyoma sat near the front, her hands folded, jaw set. When Nkairu entered, the room turned cold. She wore no scarf today. Just a plain dress and plastic sandals. Her face was blank. Like she had erased herself. The judge called for silence. The first witness was called. It was Yuzo Amaka. She stood trembling at first. Her voice shook. But as she spoke, her story became a storm. Her hands stopped shaking. Her eyes became flames. Then Ada Aura. Then one after the other. Kyoma watched them all, girls who once didn't have the strength to make eye contact now standing tall, speaking with thunder in their chests. When it was Kyoma's turn, she walked with slow steps to the stand. She didn't look at Nkairu. She looked at the judge. "I lived in a doghouse for over 6 months," she said. "And I still hear her laugh when I try to sleep. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that people let it happen. People in uniform. People in power. People who were supposed to protect us." She paused. Breathed in. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because we can't fix what we won't face. If you let her walk, then you're telling every little girl she ever hurt that they don't matter. You're saying we can be caged, forgotten, bought, and nothing will change." She finally looked at Nkairu. Not with fear. With clarity. "This is your reckoning. And ours is just beginning." Asterisk asterisk. After court, Kyoma didn't go home. She went back to the place it all started. Her aunt's old compound. The doghouse was still there, broken, half swallowed by weeds, termites dancing across its wooden bones. She walked to it. Kneeled. Touched the floor. It was strange. It didn't sting the way it used to. It didn't choke her. It felt distant. Like a shadow that had finally grown tired of following her. She stood up. Then she reached into her bag and brought out a box of matches. She didn't hesitate. One strike. The flame hissed. She dropped it. The dry wood caught instantly. The flames roared, hungry and fast, like they'd been waiting. Kyoma stepped back and watched it burn. Not as a victim. Not as a survivor. But as someone who had chosen to end it herself. Asterisk asterisk. The fire was still in her eyes when she returned to the compound. Everyone saw it. Mrs. Agbani hugged her tighter than she ever had. You're becoming something else, she whispered. Kyoma shook her head. I'm just becoming who I was supposed to be. Kelechi handed her a phone later that night. It was ringing. A woman from Asaba was crying on the other end. Her daughter had been missing for years. She saw the court footage online. She begged for help. Kyoma didn't say much. Just one sentence. Give me every detail. She wrote it all down. Name. Last location. Who the daughter last lived with. Then she passed the phone to Nonso. He began cross-referencing with the files. They found a name. A location. A possible lead. Kyoma grabbed her bag. Kelechi was already tying her hair back. Nonso threw the car keys. They were already halfway out the gate before anyone noticed. Because this wasn't the end. This was part of the work now. And they weren't scared of darkness anymore. They had become the fire. The house sat at the edge of Unum's forgotten outskirts, quiet, square, and pretending to be nothing more than an abandoned property with too many rusted nails and peeling paint. But Kyoma had seen enough of these places to know better. Real neglect didn't feel like this. Real neglect didn't leave new tire tracks outside a place nobody visited. She stood across the road in silence, watching the building through the windshield. Nonso was beside her, arms folded across his chest. We've got one chance, he said. Kelechi leaned in from the back seat. What if it's a trap? Kyoma's eyes never left the house. Then we spring it first. They moved without sound. Down the side road. Through the bush path. It wasn't bravery anymore, it was instinct. Every footstep had purpose. Every breath was controlled. Behind the house, a metal shed stood tucked into the wall, half covered with palm fronds and tarpaulin. Kyoma slipped close, pressed her ear to the side. Silence. Then a soft sound, almost nothing. A whimper. Kyoma signaled. Nonso circled to the side with a bolt cutter. Kelechi drew a short metal rod from her bag, jaw clenched. The padlock came off with a crack, and the door swung open. Inside the darkness, 5 children turned toward the light, shielding their eyes. They were barefoot, trembling, mouths gagged with cloth strips, wrists tied. But they were alive. Kyoma moved first. She dropped to her knees and whispered, "You're safe now. We came for you." She didn't ask for names. Not yet. First, she untied every hand. Held each wrist gently. Let them cry if they needed to. Let them just breathe. The youngest one, maybe 3, clung to her neck so tight she felt the girl's heartbeat thudding into her collarbone. They radioed for backup. The van came in 12 minutes. But Kyoma didn't leave. Not yet. Not until she checked the main house. She and Nonso stepped through the back. And there, by the kitchen sink, was him. Not Nkayaru. Someone worse. Her brother. Ijike. He hadn't aged much, still had the same sharp cheekbones, the same cold eyes that used to watch her suffer and say nothing. He stood frozen, hand halfway to a glass of water, like he'd been expecting someone else. "So you finally crawled out," he muttered. Kyoma didn't blink. "You kept her secret all these years. She fed us. She clothed us. She made us strong." Kyoma took one step closer. She stole children. Ijike's lips curled. "Survival isn't always clean." Kyoma stared at him. "Then rot in your filth." Nonso moved swiftly. Locked his arms. Dragged him out. The man didn't even fight. Just laughed under his breath like none of it mattered. But it did. Because this time, there were witnesses. There was evidence. There were girls being carried into safety instead of silence. And when the news broke, when the video clips spread across screens and phones and televisions, no one could say they didn't know. No one could ignore it. Asterisk asterisk. That night, Kyoma sat by the compound's old garden. The girls had gone to sleep. The smallest ones shared beds now. The older ones whispered stories long into the night, voices laced with warmth instead of fear. Mrs. Agbani brought her a small bowl of pepper soup and sat beside her without speaking. The stars above were quiet. No wind. No noise. Just healing. "Do you think it's over?" Mrs. Agbani asked gently. Kayoma shook her head. "No. But we're stronger now. They can't hide in silence anymore." The woman nodded slowly. "You're not the same girl I met." "I know," Kayoma whispered. "She died in the doghouse." They sat a while longer, watching the moon rise like a promise. And when morning came, it didn't sneak up. It arrived bold and bright like a trumpet, like a banner, like the beginning of something new. Kayoma opened her window and heard laughter below. Girls were chasing one another with soap bubbles. Someone had drawn a giant chalk rainbow on the floor. A tiny voice yelled, "Auntie Kayoma," from below. She smiled. Then turned toward her desk. Because there were still letters to answer. Still stories to hear. Still girls to find. And for the first time in her life, Kayoma didn't feel like she was fixing broken things. She was building something brand new. One story, one rescue, one child at a time. Thank you for watching this powerful story. If it moved you, don't forget to subscribe, drop a comment telling us what country you're watching from, and what your clock says right now. We love seeing how far the story is reaching and when it finds you. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter.